Critics are right to point out that without proper safeguards, this type of program could be used to yield more information about our private lives and open the door to more intrusive bulk collection programs. For all these reasons, I believe we need a new approach.
That is President Obama on Friday saying this NSA program as we know it now will end, called for a lot of reforms. Let's talk about it now on our roundtable, joined by James Carville and Mary Matalin, out with a new book, Love and War. Like this, 20 years, 3 presidents, 2 daughters, and 1 Louisiana home. David Remnick, editor of the New Yorker magazine. We're going to be talking about your profile of President Obama. Spent many hours with him. Coming up in this week's New Yorker, Peggy Noonan of the Wall Street Journal, and Tavis Smiley, the Tavis Smiley Show. And Peggy, let's begin with these NSA reforms. The president said he wanted some reforms, but also defended the program, said they've been valuable. Did he strike the right balance?
Oh, I think he sounded like a political figure attempting to strike the right balance to deal with a political problem he has among his base and among some others for NSA in the past 6 months or so since Snowden. The president has come under criticism. He's had various responses to that, from there's nothing wrong with NSA to, well, I guess we ought to be thinking about NSA. I think the speech ultimately was unsatisfying because it did not say, the president said essentially he's handling a problem, but it didn't say we are rethinking this national security state we've been in since 9/11.
That's what I want to get to, because he actually has said the state has been kind of valuable. He said it in the speech. But James, one of the things we saw there is that even though he called for the reforms, he didn't really get specific on it. The Attorney General is supposed to come up with a plan to get rid of the bulk collection programs. The courts are supposed to look at this whole issue of privacy advocates. And it just shows how complex these problems are.
The truth of the matter is, he thinks this program is effective. And it's become a little bit of a political football, so he had a press conference and put some things in, of which, by the way, some privacy advocates says and put some decent stuff that was put in there. And I kind of agree with his position. I mean, I think I'm a good Democrat and whatever, but I think some of this stuff gets some dangerous people out there in the world. And if you can make this stuff a little bit safer, which is apparently he's trying to do, maybe that's a good thing.
And David, one of the things he addressed, even in the speech, is that his own evolution on these issues as commander.
Well, when he was in the Senate, he was highly against this kind of thing, and he spoke out against it as a Democrat in the Senate. And I think the responsibilities of and the perspective of a president he's trying to impress upon us are radically different, because he's responsible for something completely other, which is the security of the United States. Look, he's in a tough position. How did this information come out? It came out through a leaker within the NSA, through Edward Snowden. He is in no position and is not going to defend the quote-unquote sinner, but the actual sin, if you want to call it that, the actual information has undeniably changed the conversation about national security and the NSA in general. And I think there's a lot of good in that, and Obama begrudgingly has to say the same. So he's walking a very fine tightrope.
Except Mary Matalin says it doesn't justify what Edward Snowden did.
No, it doesn't. But I love what you just said, that he was against it before he was for it. Now, Barack Obama is Dick Cheney. We need these policies. They are necessary for our security. The reason he's having a political problem and why it's unnecessary is because of, one, trust. The nation has a problem trusting this government with personal data on account of the IRS tracking opponents of the president, healthcare rollout incompetence, or just in general, identity theft over Christmas. We don't think we have control over the technology that's going to protect our privacy. That's why this is a hard political issue.
Tavis, I know you don't agree that Barack Obama is Dick Cheney. That is so radically wrong.
I do not agree with that. But here's what I do believe, that tomorrow, it's worth reminding the audience that we will celebrate the life and legacy of the person I regard as the greatest American this country's ever produced. That's my assessment, Martin Luther King Jr. He is the quintessential example of what it means to be forced to live under a surveillance
state. The president talked about that in his speech.
Exactly. And so when I knew the president was going to give this speech on Friday, I started to wonder what that bust of Dr. King in the Oval Office might be whispering to the president as he was fine-tuning his speech Thursday night. When I saw the Friday speech, like Peggy, I was somewhat underwhelmed. I understand, David, what he's up against, but I sometimes wonder that this president, I sometimes think, rather, that he is too cautious when he ought to be a bit more of a contrarian, particularly when a federal judge is said that part of this bulk collection is unconstitutional. And secondly, when you can't convince me how the dots connect to make us safer. I think very quickly that in the long run, Edward Snowden, we were joking earlier, Edward Snowden might be on a postage stamp somewhere down the road. Edward Snowden is going to be acknowledged one day. He's going to be appreciated. How history is going to regard what Mr. Obama has done in this moment is an open question.
I have to say the historical analogy between Dick Cheney and, with respect, and Barack Obama is absurd. I mean, this is a president who's withdrawn from 2 wars. This is a president who is constantly talking about the balance between, whether you agree with him or not, between a security state, which came after 9/11, and keeping the country secure, and civil liberties. And he's struggled with this flagrantly, maybe even ostentatiously, on the subject of drones and the rest. And things have changed. Maybe too much on the margins for me or for Tavis. Maybe not enough for others, but this is to call it Dick Cheney. I can't agree at all.
With equal respect,
Yeah.
he demonized Dick Cheney. He opposed all of these security policies, and he's now making the same point that Dick Cheney made repeatedly, which is the bad guys have to be right only 1% of the time. We have to be right 100% of the time. This is not the only policy, they're not Dick Cheney policies, they're post-9/11 security policies that he opposed and now supports.
I think we have to concede, George, that while I think Mary is wrong, respectfully, that he is no Dick Cheney. I don't believe that. But it is the case that President Obama, for too many of us, has continued the Bush-Cheney policies on a lot of issues, particularly foreign policy, and this is much more about marginal retrenchment than it is about major reform.
Look, there's a piece coming out in the New Republic later today by Shonda Lynch. And Eric Snowden, you think he might be on a postage stamp. I think he might get in the post office. But it's going to be... Yeah, I mean, I don't know who's controlling.
We'll see in 25
We have, in 25 years, we'll see if he's on the stamp.
It would be nice to have some evidence about him. I mean, to see members of Congress come out and say that Edward Snowden was a tool of Russia from the get-go, that this was all a Russian operation. I worry about congressmen getting on the air and saying this without presenting any evidence whatsoever.
Exactly.
It's now happened twice in the last several days. You're absolutely right.
Can I note the whole NSA thing, when it started to break, a former U.S. senator, a very sober and serious man, called me up and he said, if what we are reading is true about what the U.S. government can do to you, how it has the ability to invade your privacy, he said, people are going to know this, they're going to get used to it, and we're going to become a nation of sullen paranoids. The big unanswered question is, how do you keep America safe after 9/11, not have another 9/11, without not becoming not America, without becoming un-American and not the thing you want to protect? Do you know what I mean? This is a big question. I don't think the president seriously addressed it. Maybe he doesn't.
But he clearly showed that I think he was struggling with just that question
Yeah,
in the
he's
speech, even
struggling.
if he doesn't
He's
have the
struggling.
answers
Yeah.
just yet. And that does bring me to David's big piece. Boy, you spent several hours with the president over the last few months for this piece in the New Yorker this week called Going the Distance. There's a lot to chew on there. But one of the scenes that I was struck with is you go back to a time in, I guess it was 2007, he's a senator. He's meeting with Doris Kearns Goodwin and her husband, Richard Goodwin, and he tells them he doesn't want to just be one of those presidents with his picture up on the wall, another Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce. And you set out in the piece that that's really the test. Is he going to meet his own standard?
Well, his own standard, and Tavis and I will argue about this too, but I think that he's got... William Daley told my colleague Ryan Lizza that after 2014, no one cares what Obama does because the race for the successor begins to consume all the media airtime and all our energies, maybe to a great fault of the media. And that's partly true. I mean, things can happen a lot after that, those midterm elections. But this year is crucial, and last year was awful, awful. And the healthcare rollout was a self-inflicted wound. And I traveled with the president on one of these fundraising tours to the West Coast, and at each stop, he had to kind of perform his anger about what had happened. He had to show how and that's not easy for him. Anger is not one of his go-to emotions. And he's got a lot that he wants to get done, whether it's about income inequality, or about foreign policy. He has 3 huge foreign policy initiatives that have a less than 50-50 chance of succeeding even in his term.
And that's what it seems like in the piece. He seems aware of that, aware of the limits of his power. What's the analogy he uses? He's just, like all presidents, just a relay runner in the race.
Right. Well, it's an unusual thing to hear a president sitting in office admit to the limits of power. And this is a habit of mind of Barack Obama, whether it has to do with the limits of power of the United States in the Middle East, which we're not used to hearing. We usually talk in grandiose terms, or whether it's limits of power of the presidency itself.
And James, how much does the talk about the limits of power actually reduce his power?
Well, no, but our power, we can't go in the Middle East and do the things we do. We can't, it's not, there was a day when Germany and Japan, our 2 greatest threats, were vanquished, and you know what I mean? And we had a much more of a say at what went on in the world. And by the way, I don't think the American people are very anxious to go in and start dictating to people around the world what they should do. I think the attitude here a little bit is, hey, you fellas, y'all figure that stuff out over there. We're not going to get in the middle of it. And so I think, and also it's not just in the world, but I think in the United States, there's a realization that there's some things that we can do and some things we can't do, and let's be careful here. But I don't know if we want to return to like running the world.
I read David's piece last night. I thought it was a good piece, David. But I think that that the ultimate question is going to be here: how did he measure up as a leader? Did he get accomplished the things that he said he wanted to get done? My grandfather always said to me, Tavis, it's not about the work you do, it's about the work you get done. And I just don't know that the historical narrative that he wants is that it could have been worse. I don't think that's a winning storyline. And ultimately, it's about, did he get done what he said he was going to do? And I think that's an open question.
But Peggy Noonan, if healthcare works, he did.
Okay, well, then that settles it, because healthcare, thank you very much, healthcare is not going to work. It's going to haunt him over at least the next 2 years, certainly in the coming year, for the 10 reasons people like us always recite on talk shows. But can I ask a question of David? I was fascinated by your piece. I found the president in the piece to be somewhat passive, somewhat thoughtful, smart, but going through the motions. You're with him for, I think, 3 days. He's at fundraisers where he's handling rich people, and he's playing cards on the plane. I'll tell you, the portrait struck me as, whoa, we don't have enough problems for this man to be doing active and serious things while David Remnick is with him?
I think that's an odd reading. I think all modern presidents raise funds for their party. That happens. I think George Bush did it. Bill Clinton did it. There's a midterm election in the offing.
3 days? It just seemed a lot.
No. In the meantime, a government shutdown by the Republicans canceled an essential trip to Asia that had to be rescheduled. An essential trip to half the important nations in Asia was canceled completely by a Republican shutdown. I think
How about
again,
passive,
I think that's
though,
an odd,
or a sense of
I don't think that at all.
philosophically accepting of non-success?
Can I say,
I don't think he's that at all.
I think what was revelatory, I take Peggy's point, and because you spent as much time and felt like that, but he does not ever convey a sense of urgency given the problems that the whole world is facing. And what I loved about the piece, and you are a great writer, is the revelation that we all knew from the outset, the conceit, the naivete of, I'm going to come to Washington, me, Barack Obama, and make a fundamental transformation. And his answer to everything is, well, I didn't know the IRS was tagging my opponents. I didn't know my Affordable Health Care Act wasn't going to work. I don't know anything about Fast and Furious. I don't know anything about anything. Fundamental transformation. It goes to the lack of urgency.
I think the question is,
I don't think this is a lack of urgency.
I do. I got you know, I can tell we're going to have 3 more years to talk about Barack Obama, but we have some news before we get to the break on Chris Christie. And, you know, trying to turn the corner from his scandals this week. Started out this week with a mea culpa in his State of the State address.
The fact is that the lieutenant governor came to Hoboken. She pulled me aside in the parking lot, and she said, I know it's not right. I know these things should not be connected, but they are. And if you tell anyone, I'll deny it.
That was the wrong clip right there, but that was what we're going to get to. That's Mayor Dawn Zimmer of Hoboken, New Jersey, made a pretty serious charge yesterday. She said that 2 Christie aides, Mary Matalin, told her that if she did not back up a development project supported by Chris Christie, her city, Hoboken, would not get the kind of Hurricane Sandy aid they were looking for. Pretty serious charge, one she did not make earlier in the week when she said she couldn't back it up, but she backed it up with some diary entries at the time after these conversations. How serious is this, and how serious overall are these problems for Chris
So
Christie?
essentially, what's the accusation here is that Chris Christie is doing new Chicago politics. It's Chicago politics. That's how Jersey politics has always been. I'm not saying it's true or it's not true. Probably isn't true. What is fascinating, though, is the obsession by everybody, the Republican establishment, the media, on Chris Christie and what he should be doing. And James and I have been laughing for a week on our book tour. He should dress up in a toll booth outfit and go, the strategic genius given to what 98% of America could give a hoot about is what's interesting about this story.
This is what the phrase. The LIBOR scandal is a huge scandal. Hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars. It never goes anywhere. Why? Because people can't understand it. Okay, this is the most understandable thing in the world. We don't like the mayor. We closed off lanes. We left ordinary people in traffic for 4 days. I'm sorry, when you think about it, it's really, really, really upsetting.
Wait a minute, this is a politician who is thinking about running for president. We're trying to get a measure of the temperament, behavior, and corruption or non-corruption under Chris Christie, somebody who very clearly wants to be president of the United States. I see no reason at all not to be looking at this and doing the journalism and see what he knew, what he didn't know, what he was responsible for, and what he wasn't responsible for.
But I do think you can say, in fairness, that the New York-based media, which has certain political predilections or sympathies, is pounding this guy every day, in a way, deserved or not, in a way that they did not apply to IRS, the Benghazi, this one, that one. It's true. That was not front page every day. That having been said, look, Chris Christie is trying to stabilize his operation. Up till 2 days ago, it looked like it was getting kind of stable. Now we have the new Hoboken mayor, a Democrat, a person who gave a long interview on MSNBC, seems like a sincere person. We'll see where that goes. If that's a serious story and holds water, it's going to be a serious story.
I stay out of trying to handicap presidential races 2 years out because 8 years ago, nobody saw Barack Hussein Obama come in number one. Having said that, though, I am no defender of Chris Christie. He doesn't need my help. But it is the case, as we sit here this morning, George, we still don't know what he knew. We don't know what he did. And, David, to your point, it's worth remembering that. And ultimately, I think no matter how this Bridgegate thing turns out, if he can't build a bridge, Mary, to the conservative base of his party, he's on a road to nowhere anyway.
I don't disagree with that. Completely don't disagree with it. And the point is why everybody's obsessed with it is because we've already moved to 2016, which goes to your point. We haven't finished 2014 in Barack Obama.
But, I mean, in Chris Christie's not his defense, but you look at his polls this week, he actually strengthened his position in New Hampshire over the course of this week.